Now, isn't that a way to relaunch the Victoria Rumble Room? Rob and Adair, I have missed you. I cannot believe it. While we have gone, doing whatever we do, the world has changed 1,000 times. What do you think?
I don't know what to think, John. I'm just stunned by what's going on in the Middle East. Who would have thought Donald Trump was going to do? I thought it was crazy that he wanted to conquer Greenland, but now he wants to conquer the world, starting with the Middle East, and he's being embarrassed. So we're going to talk to an expert on the Middle East and politics and world affairs and the Canadian military, Chris Kilford, who is the president of the Victoria chapter of the Canadian International Council, is going to join us in a moment. But before we get to him, Johnny, I just want to say it's so great to have the Rumble Room back. We're going to get into some great topics through the spring, through the summer. So much going on in the world situation, the pipeline situation still underway. What's going on with so many different files that we haven't had a chance to dig our teeth into. Mark Carney's performance, the fact that he did so well in Davos, all these things that have me pumped. But nothing as pumped as what's going on right now with Chris Kilford. He's a former lieutenant colonel in the Canadian Armed Forces, an artillery officer, a military attaché, worked in the embassy in Ankara in Turkey, speaks fluent Turkish. What a guy. And now is the president of the largest chapter of the Canadian International Council in the country, represents all sorts of people that have worked in government, people who've worked in the military, people from the ambassadorial sector, and just people that are interested in international affairs. And yeah. Chris Kilford, an interesting guy, John, an interesting guy.
We needed to take a pause for the technology to catch up to our show. As you can tell, we've got a brand new look, brand new sound. We have voices, we have discussions, we have disagreements, but what we bring unique to this digital environment is a dialogue, which is missing in Canada. We're part of it. Chris Kilford's part of it. Let's zoom him in.
And as promised, here is Chris Kilford, Canadian International Council. And Chris, so great to have you back in the Rumble Room.
Thank you, guys. It's wonderful to be back.
Absolutely.
So you're a hot commodity because you're the guy who's talking about what's going on in all these military theaters. What happened in the Ukraine, we had you in a number of times on the Ukrainian conflict, the U.S. invasion or attacks, I guess, on Iran along with Israel. That's all just happened over the last month, and that's sort of exploded, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And now people are wondering, well, where is this all leading? How does Canada fit into this? How does the rest of the world fit into this? And as it happens, you're going to be having a talk. You're going to have a conference taking place on the 10th of April at the University of Victoria. Mm-hmm. And maybe you could explain, is the objective there to try to peel the onion on these issues?
Yes, it is. And more importantly, discussing Canada's role in all of this, internally and externally, domestically and internationally, let's say. So we do have a day-long conference at UVic on Friday, the 10th of April. We're bringing in local and speakers from further afield, and we have some keynotes and panels and two principal panels. The first will address how do we look to the future when it comes to Canada in terms of getting ourselves mobilized for the world that we face. So what are the assets we have? What do we need to do? And what do we need to get ready to do? And then the second panel is more so as we look out internationally with the assets that we currently have, what can we do around the world to try to address some of the things we see coming out of the United States and then globally, conflict-wise, development-wise, diplomacy-wise? Big talk on this. Lots of outputs are expected. You know, we have with the Canadian International Council, we have our foreign policy journals, the International Journal, Open Canada, our foreign policy magazine. We want to get information out about what we talked about. We also have a lot of students taking part too, and they are also working on products that will hopefully drive bigger conversations across the country when we run more conferences. So we have a lot going on around this conference.
You know, Chris, I manage numerous networking groups in Lower Vancouver Island, and those groups have exploded with interest lately. Mm-hmm. And I have to think why, because ostensibly I'm not doing anything differently.
Mhm.
The reason is because folks are so anxious about the state of the world and they want to know. No, how can they know? They want to communicate and chat
Yeah.
with folks. What? Within the course of this hour or so that we're going to talk, something will majorly change. How does one function in that environment?
Yes, good question. Mm, I was very fortunate when I was younger to run a future security analysis cell in the Department of National Defense with a job to look into the future, 20 years into the future, talk about what we might see happen, climate change, demographic issues, conflicts, where, when, and why, and try to say, do we have the right capabilities in the armed forces to be ready for these situations? And I have to say, it's very, very hard. You often don't get it right. I look back at that period, and this for me was almost 20 years ago when I was responsible for that group. And I think the only thing we could ever say with any certainty was that the Middle East would consistently be an issue because of so many overlapping challenges in the region. And anywhere else, you just didn't really know. So yes, so we look at things now, things that are happening today, and we have no idea what the consequences will be in a year or two or three from now because of what has happened. Yeah, what's been set in motion.
So many things have been set in motion by the US president, and
Mm,
so many of them are surprising. I could list off a list that's pretty impressive. One of them, of course, top of mind is the attack on Iran. He didn't look for buy-in from the rest of the world, other than Israel. He didn't really even seem to have an ally going into it. Now he's complaining no one's ponying up, but he didn't bring anybody in. He attacks Iran. I think he thought maybe it was going to be a quick turnaround because they take out the leadership, and just like Venezuela, the whole thing would become a happy democracy, and that didn't happen. But
mm,
so we had that happen. Suddenly, the U.S. seems to have pulled away a lot of its support for Ukraine. It's still willing to sell the weapons, but it's not willing to finance the weapons that are going in. It expects Europe to do it. And now there's all this talk about the U.S. really getting cold feet about NATO and NATO having to become maybe self-starting, and maybe what will be the future around that, and whether Canada is still involved and how that looks. So I don't know where you start this. I guess it all starts in the White House with Donald Trump. How
Yeah.
did you feel about his address to the nation?
Well, let me backtrack for just a second on that because I think President Putin, of course, thought that when he invaded Ukraine in 2022, expanded his operations there, that it too would be very quick, sorted, and Ukraine would fall easily into the orbit of Moscow, and that didn't happen. I think in the case of Trump, he thought that bombing Iran and taking out the leadership would result in some sort of uprising, maybe the Shah's son returning and something coming of it, but wishful thinking is not a strategy. And then, of course, when it does go sideways, he looks for his allies and friends who were never there because he didn't brief them. So there we go. And then last night he came out and he made a speech, and I watched the whole speech, and I was expecting him to say a couple of things. First, I thought he would say that while I'm talking to you now, the Marines are landing here,
mm,
there, and everywhere in the region
mm.
to secure certain
I
things,
thought the
and
same thing, you bet.
exactly. I thought that would be top of mind. And then he would go back on the track with NATO about how we're fed up with them. They don't do anything, and I'm going to leave. But of course, he can't leave NATO. It takes an act of Congress. It's not so easy to do, and that didn't appear in his speech. So he obviously wasn't prepared to do anything. So at the end of the day, I thought that speech was a lot of nothing. And I think also what really was shocking, although not shocking because it's not like we haven't heard this before, it's the language, right? The language being used. If the American president, and of course he would never do this, but if the American president came out and said to the American people and the international audience, look, I'm very sorry about what's happened. We knew that Iran was on the path to having a nuclear weapon, and we've had to take drastic action, which we never really wanted to do. And we lament the loss of life that is happening on both sides, things that are happening in the region. It's awful. We want it to end. When I call on the Iranian people, something like that, something diplomatic, but we didn't get that. We got this bomb them to the Stone Ages, obliterate them, devastate them. This is terrible language, no matter who, what angle you're looking at it. This is not what
I
you
wouldn't let my
expect.
grandkids talk to anyone like that.
But look, I mean, yeah, exactly. You may not. I don't like the Iranian regime. I don't like what they stand for. I don't like what they've done. But at the same time, do we not hold ourselves to a higher level, a moral higher level, that we just don't say to the other side, we're going to obliterate you and bomb you back into the Stone Age? These are real people. These are people on the other side. They're part of the country of Iran, and they may not all agree with the regime, and they may want to have their freedoms, but you don't talk about bombing countries back into the Stone Age, no matter who they are. Oh, this is what Russia would do. Russia would, even Russia doesn't say we're bombing Ukraine back to the Stone Age. They do. I mean, they blow up but they never come out and say, like would they say we're going to denazify you, etc. But they
Yes,
don't come out and
yes,
say, or although they do, but they never come out and say it. I mean, to have an American president of all people, the leader of the free world,
right.
coming out and saying this, it's well, quite frankly, it's disgusting, right? And as
Over
much
the
as we
last
love
six
America,
over
you know,
the
we,
last
we
6 months, Chris,
mm,
um, we've been our attention has been diverted by this person who wants to boot us all into the Stone Age, so to speak, by Greenland, by Venezuela,
mhm,
by Cuba, by Iran, by Ecuador.
mm,
Meanwhile, the Ukraines seem to be beating Russia
yeah,
with advanced strategies of warfare that happen to focus around drones.
yeah.
Bring us up to date. What's going on here with these drones?
Well, certainly drones have become the flavor of the day, and they've have found their place on both sides of the battlefield in Ukraine, and we're seeing them being in operation quite successfully used by Iran, the Shahed drones, and it takes a lot of money to shoot them down, and they're relatively
Mm,
significant imbalances there from a cost perspective. But from the drone warfare side, we're also seeing countermeasures taking place. We know that drones can be jammed, and roads on either side of that battlefield are covered in anti-drone nets. I mean, people are doing what they can, but there's no question those drones are frightening. Day or night, they'll find you, and tactics and techniques and so on are changing to this new battlefield. We're learning a lot. We've had Ukrainians come to Canada to actually speak and pass on their lessons learned, and we're learning a lot from them on the ground too. And so we will see, I think, ourselves adopting tactical drones more and more because they're so useful, not for just bombing people, but from an observation perspective and so on and so forth. Yes, I mean, it is the way of the future, but I don't doubt that human ingenuity will come up with countermeasures to them, and there'll be some balance. And of course, here's the thing. In Ukraine right now, both sides are quite balanced, and they use their drones as basically the only way they can of attacking one another reasonably well. So they use lots of drones. Whereas in the case of the United States, yes, the Iranians are flying Shahed drones, but there's a real imbalance in the force capability so that you have the US Air Force and the Israeli Air Force being able to fly over Iran with impunity, right? You can't fly a Russian or Ukrainian jet over each other's airspace without probably getting shot down because they're equally matched. And this is okay, fine. That is a point in time on a battlefield. Whereas, of course, the Americans would say, yes, those drones that we're facing from Iran are annoying. And the Gulf states would say, yes, they are. And they are blowing up things. But hey, you know what? Look at us. We fly up and down Iran with no trouble at all. So yeah, drones, yes, in one instance, it's a big game changer, especially for the Ukrainians. It's allowed them to
yes.
hold on, and for the Iranians, it's just the only way they really have of fighting back. And arguably, yes, the ballistic missiles too, but arguably that capacity, the capacity to do that is being diminished. So yeah, you draw your lessons from individual cases and battlefields. Like we drew a lot of lessons from fighting the Taliban and the Islamic State. One of them was that, hey, we don't need ground-based air defense. It's a thing of the past. Who will ever need that? Well, how quickly we had to pivot and are pivoting now. So yeah, be careful always with the lessons learned coming out of, battlefields, and
I think the
adapt.
Americans, though, have been under the impression they could win any war they wanted, just almost like a remote game. like
Yeah.
almost like a
Oh,
video
yeah.
game. You'd never
Sure.
have to read. I mean, they've only lost 13 individuals. I mean, it's tragic that they lost one, but
Yes.
it pales in comparison to the losses on the other side, and it doesn't really cause a lot of consternation in the United States if they start having regular flights coming back to the U.S. with coffins draped with American flags. I think the conversation's going to get a lot uglier a lot faster, and I think
Yeah.
Trump's aware of that. So
Mm. Yes.
I wonder what you see as the final outcome. Are the Americans just going to finally say, we won this, walk away, and let everybody else sort it out in their wake? Can they afford to do that? What happens to the world economic market if they just
Yeah.
walk away from the Middle East?
Well, look, America does walk away when things get tough. I know we do too, but they have. Vietnam comes to mind, Afghanistan, um, Iraq. In some cases,
But those other ones you're talking about don't provide energy to a huge percentage of the
no,
world population, right? Unlike the Middle East.
right. Exactly. And look, what has Trump done here? We know that the majority of the energy supplies coming out of that region head to the Asia Pacific, to India, to China, to Indonesia, to Japan, and so on and so forth, right? So much goes that way. And he's gone in and he's created chaos. And that chaos, in some respects, doesn't sort of fall back onto the US. The US is like, yeah, sorry about that. We were hoping for something different. I know they talk about all the things they've done. They've met their objectives, taking out the leadership, taking out the military, etc. And regime change. No, that really wasn't the idea. But I think in their heart of hearts, that was probably what they were hoping for, that there'd be a new leadership there that they could talk to. It doesn't seem to be uh, happening. And look, if you think Canadians were got punched when we uh, were told by America that we could be the 51st state, etc., and we were angry, well, think about the average Iranian, whether they support the regime or not, how they feel now with what's happened to them. So moving forward, this is one of those things that you just don't know. You don't know about. I talk about this a fair bit, unintended consequences. And so if you were in the room with Hamas on the 6th of January, 2023, the day before they launched their attack on Israel, if you'd said to them at the time, look, fellas, I know you're going to be attacking Israel tomorrow. I'm not sure how it will go. We don't know. But I can tell you something. In about 2 years and 4 months from now, the Ayatollah in Iran and much of the senior leadership will be dead. They would laugh at you. They would say, no, no, you're missing the point. We're attacking Israel. But by doing what they did and suffering the consequences in Gaza, of course, it caused Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian regime, to fall. It caused the death of much of the Iranian leadership. And so those are the consequences. And so I don't know what will happen because of what's now happened in Iran. Will we have a regime that will just be hell bent on creating chaos going forward? How would China react when they don't have the energy that's so vital to the survival of the Communist Party? These are early days. And I'm a talking head right now, but I watch other talking heads on television and they're predicting, oh, yes. And then I'm thinking, gosh, we can speculate, but we just don't know. Because I come back to that Hamas situation. Nobody foresaw that the Ayatollah would be dead in a few years after that attack because of what had been set in motion. So we've set things in motion. The United States and Israel have set things in motion for which the repercussions, we have no idea.
Chris, you segued into my question slash confusion. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm surprised by China's reaction.
Oh,
I somehow thought that they would be more aggressive, more assertive. They'd say more stuff. That Putin, he's running around being an idiot, saying expectedly what they would say.
mm.
Give me a sense of what is the consequence from the Chinese government that I am not understanding?
Right. So you mentioned Putin, first of all, and I think we should start there briefly because when we look at Moscow today, how diminished Moscow has become because of what happened in Ukraine, because again of an unintended consequences. They set a chain of actions in progress that have led to them being in this position where all they can do from Moscow when they see their notional allies in Venezuela and Cuba and Syria and now Iran in trouble, they can only offer words and maybe a boatload of oil to Cuba, but they can't really do much more. They have to be, they're witnesses to history at this point. They have been diminished in such a fashion that it's difficult to imagine that this country that was doing so well, arguably economically, was about to launch Nord Stream 2 and sell even more energy to the Europeans in 2022, is in this situation that they find themselves today. So there's the view from Moscow. And then when you swing over to China, I think it's a bit of a dilemma for them. On the surface, they have this big military and it's shiny and it's new, but they're not really eager to test it all out. They've done some things in the past. They've done anti-piracy patrols in the Red Sea. They've helped out here and there, but they're certainly not in a position, I think, to go charging in to secure energy supplies. Arguably, that might put them head to head with the US and they'd be on the side of Iran, and we'd have they'd be trying to prevent the American Navy from operating in the region. And they're not interested in doing that. Trump is going there in May, and there's going to be some discussions, and they do rely on one another, both countries. And so I think for China, again on the sidelines, where is China in all of this? They could only offer words to Venezuela, words to others. The United States, despite what the U.S. national security strategy says, that they won't interfere in other countries, are, right? They are.
It's interesting, though. Chris, I take your point on that, but I have to think that China must be thinking, boy, the Americans have really a lot of egg on their face, saying with their huge forces they can march in and create massive change in a country like Iran overnight. They've been embarrassed. They're going to have to leave now. They've lost a lot of credibility. And what does that say about all their saber waving around Taiwan, and whether the Chinese don't
Yeah.
feel like, wow, the door is kind of open for us now. We could go into Taiwan and take that place.
Yeah.
We don't fear the Americans like we did maybe even a month ago.
Well, I would say that they have to fear the United States. If anything, Iran has shown how much they have to fear the United States. Now, what's happened in Iran hasn't maybe gone according to some playbook, but clearly what we've has been shown out of the Iran situation is that the United States has military capabilities that nobody else can match. And I know Trump goes on about this all the time, like no army, no military ever before. And it's very true. I mean, these folks are operating strategic bombers at massive distances. They move troops around in these huge aircraft carriers, and they, blow you to smithereens, and there's nothing you can do
To the
about it.
Stone Age, Chris.
Yeah, I don't want to say that, but I mean, they can look. Uh, Iran may not be an instant democracy because you've added some milk to the potato powder, right? No, but they can go anywhere they like and do anything they want. And I think from the China's perspective, they would begin to realize that because the United States has been engaged so many times around the world in various sort of combat related actions, that this is a highly honed force. And they are not. We've spoken about this before. This is a Chinese military that has absolutely zero combat experience. They haven't done anything significant. I wouldn't even use the word significant really for over half a century. So they must look at what the United States is doing with awe, only wishing they could do the same. And I would think if you're sitting in Beijing, watching what's happened to Putin and watching what's happened to Trump, because exactly as you say, Robin, they've gone in and they've created this huge amount of destruction and not had the perfect outcome. If you were sitting in Beijing, you'd say to yourself, the last thing I would ever want to do in the world would be to attack Taiwan. How crazy would that be? First of all, Taiwan is no pushover, and they're like sitting far offshore, really. The United States, Japan, South Korea, all of them would do something or other. It would disrupt my economy. As we've seen, you want to affect China. If China gets out of line, if you want to stop and grind the Chinese economy to a halt, well, then you mine the Strait of Hormuz, right? America mines the Strait of Hormuz and other choke points along the way. And how quickly would China be brought to its knees? And let's be clear, the Communist Party of China draw their um, legitimacy, such as it is, by offering the Chinese people, a large number of them, a reasonably good way of life. And if
Right.
you fail to do that, then you are going to be in trouble. So I think there's a lot of lessons for President Xi to avoid entangling himself like Moscow and Washington has done in ridiculous military operations. At the yeah, that would be that's how I would take it. But sadly, sometimes leaders act in ways that we don't expect.
Yeah. Can I ask you about Mark Carney in the middle of all of this? Is he
Right.
the new hope for North America continuing to be involved in NATO? Do you think
Yeah.
that the Americans are even really serious about pulling the plug on it? And the Europeans, are they serious about stepping in and rebuilding their military, maybe like it was back in the Second World War, numbers and size, but
Yeah.
coordinated as opposed to an opposition to each other?
Right. I think through the actions of Putin in Ukraine and also the United States under Trump being very forceful about this, countries are spending a lot of money on defense, huge sums of money on defense. I don't know if it's really sustainable in the long term when the bills start to actually come in. And will we continue down this path? I think there are look, I think what is happening is needed in many respects. Most European militaries were very hollow and something needed to be done. But on the other hand, it's expensive to do what we're doing. So if the war in Ukraine was to come to some sort of end, some sort of ceasefire, if the United States, the administration was to change in some fashion, be less vocal, less forceful, then I think many countries, including Canada, would start to look for off ramps where they don't have to spend as much as rapidly and draw a tiny bit of a peace dividend from what we're seeing, because there has been a visceral reaction to what has been happening at this point in time, and the money is coming. But what do you want? Do you higher taxes are coming, less services are coming, bigger deficits are coming, or all of the above? And I don't think the average Canadian, I think the average Canadian is in a pot on the stove with the water on a low boil. And when the bills start to really come in for these billions and billions that are going to defense, security, and so on, they'll really start to worry. We're seeing some of this now, cuts in the public service, cuts in the diplomatic corps. The one thing you'd think you'd need actually out there to prevent a lot of conflict. You're seeing this. And what about other things, especially as we know, millions of Canadians don't have doctors, et cetera, et cetera, et
Mhm.
cetera. So, we'll see. We'll see. Something needs to be done, but are we overreacting? Well, are we kowtowing to Washington and the 5%? Yes. And it's quite interesting. I think we're
But
doing
haven't
it
we
in,
totally hollowed ourselves out over the last like 40, 50 years? I mean, really, Canada hasn't been pulling its weight militarily for ages. And I'm
yeah,
surprised, frankly, Chris,
yeah,
I honor
yeah,
your opinion, but
yeah,
you're a former military officer. I mean, it's
yeah.
terrible the way we brought in those Trident submarines. They didn't work
The
efficiently. Our
Victoria.
tanks are massively out of date. We're
Yes,
having this
yes,
huge debate about getting better jets. I mean, those things are all expensive, but aren't they
yes.
necessary if we're going to be a sovereign country?
They are, and many militaries, not only ours, found themselves in a similar situation. The Germans, the Poles, the Brits, everybody, the French. Money had been moved into other areas, social programming, that kind of thing. And rightly so. I mean, arguably, you don't want to be spending $1 million on a missile. Um, well, you have them, but you don't want to keep you don't want to have huge sums going to
I
one
just want more
sector.
drones. I don't want more missiles.
Yeah.
I like the
No,
drones.
your point's taken. But like I've said before, even before all of this big spending took place, we were the 15th or 16th highest defense spender in the world. Um, even beforehand. So we do spend lots of money in our security, and our military has done tremendous things. We've done tremendous things in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places now, Latvia, our ships, our planes, our people. Even when we've had very antiquated equipment, we've managed to pull it off. Now, that is not what you'd like to see going forward. You do need main battle tanks. You do need other things. Yes. However, we're entering into new territory here, going from 4 very ancient submarines to 12 wonderful big submarines and destroyers and big drones. We're into, and maybe more stuff is coming, more people. I'm not saying you don't need to have it, but at the end of the day, you're going to be facing some huge bills, and the trade-off is what? And to counter all of that, you could arguably say, no one wants to talk about this, but arguably, Russia is a much diminished power. It is not what we thought it was. It's killed itself on that front line for almost, well into the fifth year now. So it turned out to be a hollow force. China is constantly arresting its senior leadership for corruption, and I don't know if you were to delve inside that force realistically. I'm not discounting the fact that they can create problems for you, but is it a threat? Look, I'm saying a lot here. You do need to be prepared, and we belong to an alliance, and we should all be working together as we've done, and not forget that even though we've had our issues, we are an incredibly powerful organization. NATO is an incredibly powerful organization led by the United States largely, but we carry our own weight. We let things atrophy. Like when I was a young soldier, the first air defense gun that I was given in the 1980s was a 1940s Bofors used to shoot down Messerschmitts. And I was told I needed to use that against Russian jet fighters. Hilarious stuff. Um, we we do need to make sure that the force structure we have is fully staffed, modern, ready to go, high readiness levels. Yes, indeed. But will Canadians at the end of the day be able to stomach defense budgets in sort of $130 billion range every year versus the what it has been in the past, 35, 36 billion? This is a dramatic jump. And if I'm not mistaken, we this year are facing an almost $80 billion deficit
Yeah.
before we get into all this stuff. So,
So
oh,
Chris, I have some minutiae. Going to
yeah,
dive into some details around this. In advance of an April 10th conference
right.
that the Victoria chapter, which you manage, of the CIC is managing, and putting forth to the
Hmm.
public. And that, okay, and all of this kind of stuff will be talked about. So
Yeah.
this question fits within that framework.
Hmm.
So so much of the excitement locally, frankly, the excitement is that businesses are expecting to get some money from all of this
Yeah.
defense spending, right?
Right.
And they're going to employ people, and there's a
Yeah.
sense that the money's going to sort of be circular like this. From your expertise, from your network, et cetera, is all of this money actually being spent, or is it a little bit of smoke and mirrors here? Is Carney going 2,
Oh,
3% and like, whoa, we're all so excited. Where's the money?
there's a lot in what you just said, John. There's a new defense industrial strategy, which talks about all the money flowing into defense, and it will be there for a lot of things, but a large part is to drive the economy, whether it's in the Arctic with new infrastructure, dual use infrastructure, or more locally in BC, defense industries having a chunk of that money to create and build new capabilities. People want to have a chance to have some of that money. And there's an argument around the defense industrial strategy that it's more about economics than it is delivering the best capabilities to the
Mm,
Canadian forces. So arguably, if you wanted to have the best capabilities, you might be buying from foreign suppliers. But there's a big buy Canadian part to this, and so that's fine. Um, so people are on board, create 125,000 new defense related jobs in the country. Uh, there's a lot of that. So it is an economic strategy. It's a nation building strategy, the defense industrial strategy. And it's also about delivering new capabilities as well. But back to your question about can you actually deliver on what is announced? Well, we know from history that the Defense Department would, for a lot of reasons, give back money at the end of the fiscal year, largely because we weren't able to move out quickly or as quickly as we thought we would on certain projects. So we would hand back money. So I do believe that money will consistently be handed back because I don't believe, have the necessary people in place to deliver on many of these big projects. We do have a hole in the force structure, in the regular force in particular. We need to have, rebuild and add more people. And it comes at a time when defense companies, as they ramp up, will actually be cherry picking or trying to cherry pick some of your military people to be a part of their teams in the civilian world. So that submarine person expert will be grabbed perhaps by the Germans or the South Koreans, depending on which way we go. So as you're madly trying to train people to man submarines, people are being poached from the other end as civilian companies look for their expertise. So there's a lot of moving parts, and I think I think that a lot of the announced money will end up back in the coffers of the government and, until a lot is in place to begin to deliver on these capabilities. Yeah. Oh, look, I mean, most countries are doing this. 5% of their GDP, they're putting infrastructure projects in there, which they're allowed to do, but moving the Coast Guard into the Department of National Defense, and you're going to see a few things like that. So, what are the real capabilities that come at the end of the day because of your 5%? Maybe you're just, I don't know, right
Yeah.
now, I'm not seeing anything terribly novel coming out of all of this spending. It's basically do more of the same. You get your frigates, you get your jet fighters. I'm not seeing anything novel. I'm not seeing anyone saying we're going to build 1 million Shahed
Yeah.
drones.
If they remain
Um,
disciplined to this notion of dual usage,
mhm.
then certainly our economy will benefit from all of this spending, even if it's not necessarily using the supply chain, the Canadian supply chain. But
Yes.
dual usage will be amazing if we can then capitalize on those innovations. Would be amazing. Would be very helpful for the economy.
Absolutely. There's a host of big projects that were announced in the Arctic that will no doubt they won't benefit, probably won't benefit the military at all very much, but they will benefit the economic development of the North, and of course, and then arguably that is benefiting your overall security. So yes, look, I mean, these are projects that were long overdue. They were talked about for a long time, and we'll see. We will see on some of this stuff. The Navy wanted a refueling port in Nanisivik for a long time, and it's really not happened. So yeah, we have a lot on our plate. I don't think we have enough people in place in Ottawa and elsewhere to drive a lot of these projects at this time. I'm sure they're scrambling to do this, but delivering big ticket items has always been a challenge in our country. It's actually remarkable when I look at what's happening now anyway, despite what I said. The joint support ships are being built, steel is being cut for the destroyers. We've got the Arctic Patrol ships that are with us now. Drones, big drones are coming. New trucks, vehicles, all sorts of things are actually coming.
Okay, that's great.
It's
Yeah.
not hopeless at all. And
Mm.
recruitment is going quite well from what I understand. There are young people wanting
Well,
to
see, this is
join.
a more positive way of leaving this topic here, Chris. It was sounding
Yeah.
like you were deploring the fact that we wanted to put more money in our military, and now we're hearing it's
Yeah.
being spent in a really great way. And this is, I think, people have been
Yeah.
feeling. I mean, for one, with Afghanistan, I felt so badly that we had so few ground troops that we had to keep rotating the same ones through over and over again and wearing our
Sure.
our ground troops out. If we probably could have used two or three times more people that were trained to do that, and then we
Mm.
wouldn't have burnt everybody out the way we did. But I mean, it just seems
Yeah.
to me there's ways we could do this where we don't
Right.
go crazy and try to become like North Korea, where 50% of the budget goes to military, that at the same time have
Mm.
a military we can all be proud of, including people that actually are serving right now.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in there because, arguably we're burning ourselves out in Latvia. A large part of our army of roughly 22,000 folks are are either, on their way to Latvia, in Latvia, getting ready to go to Latvia. The large part of the army is focused on there, and it's not a large army when you think about all the things that an army should be doing. And I think the reason why I'm a little bit pessimistic is because while all this money has been flowing into defense, we actually haven't sat back as a country and asked ourselves, what the heck are we doing? What is this really all about? The last time we sat down and did a close look at ourselves in this way is our national security policy from 2004 under the Paul Martin government. And I'm not saying we don't lack for strategies. We have an Indo-Pacific strategy, an Africa strategy, a foreign policy, a defense strategy. We've got all of those pieces. But while we're bringing, like, I haven't not seen force projections that say, wow, with all of these submarines coming in and all the new artillery coming in, how many people do we actually need? And are they in the right places for all of this? Maybe somewhere in the bowels of National Defense Headquarters, this is being worked on. But then there's the larger picture from a national level. Where should we be positioned globally? The last thing I heard, we were cutting about 10% of our Global Affairs Canada workforce. We're cutting development money. I don't think this is a good idea, especially if it's all being funneled into defense. Previously, American generals have said to their government, if you cut the development budget, you better increase my defense budget because I'm going to have to be going around the world cleaning up a lot of messes that may have been prevented. I'm a bit of an optimist because I'd like to see a larger look at things before we start throwing huge sums of money around into one thing or another. And a national security strategy is not just about defense. It's about you as a country, your internal workings, your the fact that people from all around the world, and what do we need to do? School systems need to be strengthened. All of these pieces, they all need to be looked at and put out on paper. And I'm not saying a national security strategy is the be all and end all. If you look at the U.S. national security strategy, for example, it's full of contradictions. It's not worth the paper it's written on. The United States in that policy says that we will not interfere in the activities of other countries going forward. Well, come on, but I think we do need that larger look. And Prime Minister Carney has promised that we will do this, and I think it's long overdue. And so let's see what happens. Yeah, So look, I want to be pragmatic and optimistic, but I just get this sense that the announcements are flying out all over the place without a coherent strategy. I think that's
which is why it's so important to have this important discussion on the 10th of April at the University of Victoria.
Yes.
All these things are going to happen, and then you guys can report back to Mark Carney, and he can do something about it. And then he can watch the Rumble Room, and maybe that will inform him as well.
Look,
and so we're going to leave this on a very positive note here with our great thanks to you, Chris. We've really peeled the onion on this, I think, as far as we can peel it for this show. Yeah. And Johnny, any more questions from your side of the thing?
No, I this is amazing. I'm constantly enthralled by when Chris speaks.
We always feel like we're sitting at the altar of Chris Kilford, but
I'm so glad. Stop it. As sort of our starting our well, I'm going to call it our spring offensive. The Rumble Room, to have you as our first speaker is such an honor.
Thank you. It's an honor, too, to be able to actually, dare I say, pontificate on some of these things. I'm one of those talking heads that I criticized that I see on television. But I think our conference on the 10th, look, what will happen there? This is part of the civil discourse in our country. You bring people together, you talk about these things, you raise their awareness. They ask the tough questions to their politicians and their friends and so on. And you hope for the best. And I have to say, being Canadian, where else would you want to be, right? In the world, really, where else would you want to be?
Where else would you want to be but here? In Canada and on the Rumble Room? And on that point, rumble on.